Think back to this past Monday morning. What was going through your head when you woke up? It was probably what was making you most tense for the day or for the coming week. But that Monday morning feeling might have started even earlier. You might have found yourself on Sunday, reading a book or watching TV. You might have been taking a spoon to a pint of ice cream, feeling distressed by the prospect of Monday morning arriving too quickly again. This scenario may feel familiar to you. This feeling of dread on Sundays, it even has a name, the Sunday Scaries. Could you imagine spending your entire life feeling this way? These feelings of dread are typically a sign of not being engaged with how we're spending our time, which for most of us is our work. But the reasons we may be unhappy are highly individual and personal. No one teaches us how to look for the reasons we might be unhappy, starting during the interview process when looking for a new role. We're typically trained that interviews are a time for the company to evaluate us, not the other way around. Now, you may be looking for a new role, or you might be happy with your current situation. But I believe it's important for all of us to reflect on what could prompt the Sunday Scaries for us. Now, I focus on this topic both personally in my own life and in my work life while conducting research on this topic, and now leading a team dedicated to employee well-being here in Boston. My hope is for you that you can learn from some of the challenges I've faced and the challenges I so often watch others navigate. Today I'm going to talk about how you can take steps down this path, starting with the idea of defining your non-negotiables. To say this another way, these are the things that you most value in your work life. Now, take a moment with me to picture yourself preparing for an interview. As you sit there preparing, you have a notebook. What are the things that, when you arrive that day, you most want to understand to know if you might quickly dread working at this place? Early in my career, I didn't really stop to ask myself this question or think about my non-negotiables. These are really big questions. It can be tough to even know where to start. I spent a long time not knowing where to start when I was dreading Mondays. I was actually dreading any day that I had to wake up for work. And it was at this point that I tried to find other outlets of happiness and engagement to offset this dread that I felt at work, but I didn't usually feel like I could even find the energy to do that. I remember the confusing feeling of being exhausted at 5 p.m., but not really knowing how to justify why I was feeling so tired. Getting exercise and eating well fell out of my routine, and I started to feel a little ghost-like, floating without much conviction or direction. This started to take a toll on my relationships too. I stopped responding to texts. I didn't really feel like I had anything to say. My husband didn't really know how to help, so our conversations went a bit stale. And my colleagues and I, we got stuck in this downward spiral of complaining what felt like most of the time. Now, I don't believe that my experience is all that unique. In fact, I know it's not. Study after study show that so many people are in roles they dislike. The numbers show that roughly 50% of people are unhappy or unengaged at work, with some estimates as high as 87% of people around the world. Now, historically, these numbers have been really important to organizations because unengaged employees means lower productivity for them. But that's just one side of this story. Throughout my journey, it felt like not enough people were focused on supporting people like me in overcoming these really challenging and sometimes miserable work situations. So let's all agree that none of us want to feel this way. To start down this path, we'll steal an idea from dating, defining your non-negotiables. These are the things that you really know you need or really know that you don't want. This also gets us to a conversation around motivation and how and why we make the choices that we do. Money is one of those motivators that is often front and center when making decisions about our work. A paycheck or the size of that paycheck might be the driving factor for many of us. But a few years ago, I became curious what beyond money might also motivate us at work. It's here I picked up a personal project with a friend where we interviewed dozens of young people who were looking at leaving their current role or had just moved on from a prior job. We wanted to understand what prompts people to move on and how they determined what was important enough to them to make that change. And through these conversations, we found that so many people could identify a single moment or event that triggered this decision to move on for them. For one person that we spoke with, it was during a performance review, where they felt they were being unfairly evaluated and that their hard work had been going unseen for months. For someone else, it was when they asked to take a vacation day. Their sister was visiting in town, but they were told absolutely not. Now for me, I had an inflection point very similar, where I was on vacation one year, and I had an internal project creep up at the last moment that forced me to work while I was away with my family. But in the end, this project was never used or really acknowledged by my company. So I spent my vacation working, which in itself wasn't a problem, but in the end it didn't feel like that was really necessary. This made me feel like I wasn't valued there, and I remember the specific moment that I realized that. And now these feelings of not being valued, they typically stir for a while across many situations or encounters, but build up to this inflection point that's often especially memorable. But what happens after this point is often where people get stuck and don't know what to do. And without a framework or a mindset to fall back on, getting unstuck can often feel like winging it, if you even make a change at all. This is where having non-negotiables as guides becomes especially meaningful. Now, in my work, my colleague and I developed a set of 3 questions to help people reflect on their experiences to work towards defining their non-negotiables. The first one is to take a moment and think about the best day that you've ever had at work. What made it so awesome? Could be the nature of what you were working on, maybe who you were working with. Maybe there was an accomplishment that came to fruition that day that was a long time in the making. But think about the reasons why this day popped to mind so quickly for you. The next question is to think about the best person that you've ever worked with. What made them stand out? This could be a manager, this could be a professor, it could be a friend or a peer who's helped you along your way, even a family member. Think about the qualities that this person exhibits that you look up to and why they came to mind here. And the last question is to think about the best environment that you've ever spent time in. What made that environment feel really amazing? And again, this could be anything. This could be a traditional office. This could be a coffee shop that you really like just hanging out in. What about a retail store that you walked into and were like, wow, this feels really cool? But any space that contributed to a feeling that you enjoyed or that was helpful to your productivity or your work. Now, the goal of these questions is to draw on our experiences to create a short list of non-negotiables that we can use in decision-making. It's also worth thinking about the opposites of each of these things. So really challenging days or really irritating people. What about environments that felt especially negative or draining? And now through our work, my colleague and I worked with a handful of higher level themes that we also found were helpful in this reflection process towards defining your own non-negotiables. These are themes like the people that you're working with and the growth potential that you might have here. We've talked about the physical environment, the role that can play, and compensation often being front and center for many of us. There's also the nature of the role itself and the tasks at hand and how you're spending your time. what you're working on? And what about your personal life and the balance or the harmony that you may or may not have in a current role or a future role? And the culture and the norms of where you're working are often the things that go unsaid, or how people treat each other. And then the industry you're working with. Still could be the people, but maybe you're passionate about a cause that you want to follow through, or something you want to solve. We've heard so many conversations about great discoveries today. So a few minutes ago, I talked about an example of someone's whose inflection point came during a performance review. This was a very specific example, and while these are very broad themes, coming out of this experience, that person may have developed a non-negotiable around looking for a manager relationship where they would never be caught off guard by that type of performance delivery again. So for that person, their non-negotiable may level up to a theme around choosing wisely around the people that they're working with in a current or a future role. I also talked about someone who was told they couldn't take a day off when their sister was visiting. For this person, they may have developed a non-negotiable that levels up to the culture and the norms of where they're working. Maybe around the autonomy that they're looking for in their role, so that if they want to take a day off, as long as they manage their work, they can do that. And having the flexibility and the support that they need. Now, I also talked about a personal example where my inflection point came while on vacation. And I had an internal project, but it was never really used. Now, I learned later that there was a plan for this work that I hadn't been told about. And coming out of this experience, I've since developed one of my non-negotiables to be looking for strong levels of transparency and honesty in the environment that I'm working in. Now, this is a mix of these two themes I just talked about, where I'm looking to work with people who will regularly be honest with me about the state of projects, about how I'm doing, but also looking to be a part of an environment that expects that and holds people accountable. Now again, these are very broad themes, and these are just a few examples of more specific non-negotiables that might come out of these. But in our work overall, there were a handful of trends that we heard time and time again in the more specific non-negotiables of those that we spoke with. The first one is people looking for strong opportunities for learning. This may resonate with you. You might see this in your community. I see this everywhere, with a curiosity to learn and grow, both in life and at work. The next trend that we found was looking for a bias towards collaboration and having the default be working together rather than problem solving alone. The last trend was looking for explicit support for not just professional growth, but personal growth at work. This is important that this moves beyond just skill building and the typical definition of professional growth, but people are looking for their growth as people and individuals happening as an integration with their life and their work. And now to this last theme, this project overall, for me, turned out to be a really important phase of personal growth and a pivot point in my career. It's coming out of this work that I've since developed a theme and a focus around the role that company culture can play in contributing to our well-being as individuals. It's through this journey that I've finally been able to shed my Sunday scaries and emerge out the other side with a renewed energy on Monday mornings and a love of what I do. Now, in my work, I'm always looking to support our employees in not just identifying their non-negotiables, but keeping them front and center, even if they're happy in their current role. Using these as a regular check-in for all of us can be really important to understand if where we are is most in line with what's important to us, or if it might be time for a change. Now, I also bring this mindset to conversations with prospective talent when interviewing as part of my role. I'm looking to understand if candidates can identify their non-negotiables and bring them to the conversation with me. I want them to be interviewing us too, to understand if those things might be present here, and if they too could shed their Sunday scaries if they worked here. Now take a moment with me, just like we did at the start, to imagine yourself preparing for an interview. Now that you've prepared, you show up on the day and you're asked to wait in a sitting area. You're there a little early. Instead of focusing on your nerves, remember that this is a two-way street and that you're here to interview them too and evaluate against your non-negotiables. And as you walk into that room, what are the things you most want to understand to make sure that you wouldn't quickly dread working there? And while you're in that room, imagine you were given a job offer on the spot. What are the things that would lead you to turn it down? I believe that we owe it to ourselves to walk into that room ready to not just evaluate, but advocate in support of our well-being, our growth, and our ability to be the best versions of ourselves. Defining our non-negotiables is how we gain the clarity to keep control of what we want in our work lives. Thank you.